It's with great pleasure I introduce this year's speaker, Erika Nesvold. Erika is, in some sense, a Maryland native. She spent some time here as a child and went to undergrad here at UMBC as a math major. She graduated with super high honors of all kinds in math and then transferred over into physics into the PhD program here in the fall of 2009. And she's making rapid progress through the PhD program. She's now entered into PhD candidacy, which means she's working on her dissertation in astrophysics, and specifically she's studying exoplanets, which literally means she's looking for new planets that haven't been discovered yet. So an exciting area of research, and she's working primarily down at Goddard on that. Erika, for those of you who know her, is also an amazing person. She's an accomplished skydiver. She's a musician of some caliber in many different instruments, and just a great person to have in the department. So without further ado, I give you Erika Nesvold.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me just find my lucky laser pointer here. Yep, that's good. It's really great to present this year's Mulligan Lecture. Thank you so much to the Mulligan family for this opportunity, and it's great to have all our guests here. I chose Tesla because I had heard a couple interesting things about him, but nothing really detailed. Everyone's kind of heard of, they've heard the name before. There's a unit of magnetic fields named after him, so most physics students have heard of him. But not many people really know the whole story of his life. And so I was intrigued. I decided to look into it. And I couldn't have made a better choice. He led a downright fascinating life. Luckily for me, he wrote a really excellent autobiography, which is just full of hilarious anecdotes and a really dry humor. I recommend it to everyone. And so this is a great opportunity for me. I hope that you all enjoy hearing the story of his life as much as I enjoyed researching it. I ask that if you have any questions, you raise your hand or interrupt me and ask them at the moment, because there's a lot of stuff in here, and I want to make sure everyone remembers their question and gets a chance to ask it. So feel free to interrupt me, and I'll be happy to share as much as I know about Tesla. So if you're one of those people who thinks maybe they've heard of Tesla before but doesn't really remember what he does, a couple of the things he's most famous for, I'll just tell you right off the top. He developed the AC, or alternating current induction motor. Here's a picture of a couple of them. I'll go into much more detail about these later. He did a lot of work in rotating magnetic fields that developed this motor. And he also worked very hard on the wireless transmission of energy, and that led to the invention of the Tesla coil, which I'm sure is how most of the people have heard of him. It's these things you see at science museums with the giant bolts of lightning coming off of them. And over here in the corner, I have a very, very, very small scale version of a Tesla coil that I'll be demoing for you guys at the end. Not nearly as impressive looking as this, but I think you guys will like it.
Who made that one in the corner?
I did, yeah. So let me just start at the beginning. Nikola Tesla was born in Mulligan, Croatia, modern-day Croatia, although he was ethnically Serbian. He was born in 1856. Mulligan isn't on this map because it's a tiny little village, but it's near the town of Gospic, where he later went to school, and the village has been absorbed into Gospic nowadays, so that gives you kind of an idea. Here's a picture of his house, which is still standing today because both Serbia and Croatia are very proud of Tesla and have tried to preserve a lot of his life. So this is the house he grew up in. Right next door is the Serbian Orthodox Church, where his father was a priest. Here's a young Nikola at age 23, very charming man. His father, as I mentioned, Mulligan Tesla, was a Serbian Orthodox priest. His mother, Juka, was the daughter of a Serbian Orthodox priest, ran in the family, and unfortunately for me as the historian, she was never photographed. She never learned to read, anything like that, but according to Nikola, she was extremely intelligent, a great inventor, invented all sorts of devices to help around the house. She would design needlework and do things by hand. He said when she was in her, well past her 60s, she could still tie 3 knots in an eyelash. That's his claim. So since I don't have a picture, here's a bag that she designed and made by hand. Which is very, very intricate needlework there. Tesla had 3 sisters, Milka, Angelina, and Erika here. One of them, I believe Angelina, has descendants that are still alive today. He also had a brother named Danilo, but Danilo was also never photographed because he died at the age of 12 when Nikola was 5 in a really tragic horse riding accident. And this hit the whole family very, very hard. Danilo was an extremely bright boy, and Nikola said that for the rest of his life he felt like he was living in the shadow of his older brother and felt like he could never quite live up, which is ironic considering all of the amazing advances he made in physics, but I think anyone who's got an older sibling can kind of relate to that feeling. Danilo and Nikola shared an interesting mental ability, some would say a curse, he thought of it as a curse at some point, which could be described as visions. From the time he was a small child, if someone said the name of an object in front of Nikola, he would immediately picture the object in front of him in such great tangible detail that he couldn't tell what was real and what wasn't. That's how vividly it would appear before him. And this was greatly disturbing to him when he was a kid until he learned how to control it and realized that, particularly for an inventor, it was an amazing gift because when he was inventing or developing a new device, he could picture it in front of him in such detail that he could even run it forward and backward, take it apart right in front of him in his mind. He could even, if he ran it for a long time, he could see the wear in an engine developing over time. And so this is a great benefit to him, to the point where it came so naturally to him that he says in his autobiography, "I don't understand why people build prototypes. It's just a waste of time and money. You can just picture in your head and then build the thing. I don't understand." Now, as is often the cliche, with this great gift came some real problems for him mentally. He had a lot of mental problems that got worse over his life. He had several different phobias that may seem strange to us. He was afraid of jewelry, women's jewelry, necklaces, earrings. He was afraid of peaches, camphor oil. He was terribly afraid of hair. He says in his autobiography, "I would not touch the hair of other people except perhaps at the point of a revolver." That's how much he hated it. He also had what was probably obsessive compulsive disorder, OCD, particularly later in his life. He would repeat things 3 times, which is a common symptom of that. He said he couldn't enjoy a meal unless he first calculated the volume of the dish before him, and he had to do that in his head before he could begin eating. He also was obsessed with pigeons. That's why there was a pigeon there. Near the end of his life, when he was living in New York, there was a white pigeon that visited him daily that he became quite enamored with. So all sorts of these problems, but he managed to control them and really use his great mental abilities to do many, many great things throughout his life, despite all of these problems.
Erika, did anybody ever in readings, did anybody ever look at the word Asperger to him?
I have heard that thrown around because he also had a lot of social problems. He didn't like women very much. He was kind of intimidated by them. He was a lifelong bachelor and things like that, and he had these amazing abilities. Also, synesthesia is a reverse diagnosis that people give him. Synesthesia is a kind of cross-wiring of the senses that could have led to this really vivid ability to picture things. Yeah.
Did he have any child?
Did he have any what?
Any child, his children?
And no children. No children, no women. His only descendants are through his sisters. So his visions from the time he was a child, like I said, once he learned to control them, really helped him out. They helped him survive a lot of scrapes that he got in as a child. Once he was swimming in a dam and went over the edge of the dam and was holding on and would have been killed, except that he could picture exactly the hydrodynamics of the whole system and figured out he had to turn on his side and crawl off the edge of the dam. And he was about 9 years old at the time. His first invention was a fishing hook, which for catching frogs, which doesn't sound that impressive until you find out that he had never seen one before. One of the boys in his town, when he was 6 years old, got a fishing hook as a gift, and all the boys ran off to go catch frogs. But Nikola had a fight with the boy, so he wasn't allowed to come. So he, went off on his own, made his own little fishing hook, probably looked a little something like this, and figured out exactly the perfect technique for catching frogs. And all the other boys came home empty-handed, and he had a sack full of frogs. So right then, he had a taste for what inventions and engineering could do for him. The next thing he tried is he took these charming little guys, Maybugs, kind of like our June bugs, and he tied them to a wheel and let them just fly in a circle. And he said they would fly for hours powering this tiny wheel engine. And he was completely delighted by it until a neighbor boy came by and ate one of the bugs. And then he was so disgusted by it, he never touched an insect again. When he was 7, his family moved to the town of Gospic that I showed you on the map. And he was immediately unpopular because he was running around in church and jumped down and landed on some lady's train of her dress and ripped it. So he was not very popular. until the town's fire squad was demonstrating the new pumper. Now this is a fire pump from Philadelphia from around the same era. Basically, you stick the hose in the nearby river and you get on there and pump, and that's what they did. They're pumping like crazy, the whole fire crew's pumping, the town's waiting to see the water, nothing's happening. Gets really awkward, and then little 7-year-old Nikola looks at the whole system, sees the hose going into the water, realizes the problem, jumps in to the river and opens up the hose, which had collapsed. And the water came through, and Nikola's a hero after that. He says that as a child, of all things, he liked books the best. His father had a large library, but Nikola wasn't allowed to go in there because books were very precious, and Nikola was a rowdy little boy, but he would steal the books away. And his father had to start hiding all the candles in the house so that Nikola couldn't take the books and read them at night, so Nikola just made his own candles. Tesla went to high school, what we would call high school, at the Higher Real Gymnasium in Karlovac, Croatia, right there. Fortunately for me, it's still standing today, and here's a picture of it. He stayed with his aunt and uncle. His aunt fed him very, very tiny portions that he complains quite a lot about in his autobiography, so he sounds like a very normal teenage boy to me. He caught malaria while he was in high school, which there's a certain pattern I noticed in his biography, which is that he got deathly ill quite a lot. Malaria was the second time he had been terribly ill in his childhood. But he recovered. He finished his high school in 3 years instead of 4. And he had a really excellent physics professor who inspired him to be an electrical engineer. So he went home, he said, "Dad, I want to be an electrical engineer. I'm going to go off to school." And his dad said, "No, son, you're going to join the clergy, like every man in your family does." And they had great fights about it, and then Nikola caught cholera and became deathly ill again. And so he's lying there, deathly ill. His father comes in and says, "Oh, Nikola, what can I do for you?" And Nikola looks up at his father, and this is straight out of his autobiography, looks up at his father and says, "Well, I could get better if I was allowed to be an engineer." And his father said, "You'll go to the best engineering school I can find," and then Nikola got better. So this is why I'm a little suspicious of his deathly illnesses. So his father sends him to the Polytechnic Institute in Graz, Austria. Lovely building here. He loved it so much he wanted to impress his parents, so he studied from 3 a.m. to 11 p.m. every day in his first term. Took 9 classes, aced them all. Came home for the semester break, and his parents were just not that impressed. And he was really disappointed until he realized that the teachers had been writing home and saying, "Your son is going to kill himself working this hard. You need to encourage him to slow down a bit." So then he felt bad, and when he went back to school, he just focused on physics, mechanics, and math after that. In one of his physics classes, he saw a demonstration of a dynamo, or a DC motor, which I won't go into the details too much, but this motor runs on direct current rather than alternating current. And one of the flaws in a DC motor is that it needs brushes, which are just the rotor turns in the motor, and the brush sits along the edge and conducts the current across. But there's a lot of sparks and wear where the brushes touch the rotor. And so Nikola, watching the demonstration, wondered out loud if maybe this could be redesigned using alternating current without the brushes. And the professor said, "Yeah, you think you're so smart, but really that's impossible. You don't know what you're talking about." And just shut him down. And Nikola, believing in the infallibility of physics professors, as we all do at some point, believed him. But the problem stuck in his head, and he continued to work on it for the rest of his life and for the next several years. He finished his education at the University of Prague in the Czech Republic. He continued to work on this AC problem in his head, trying to figure out how you could design a motor that ran off of alternating current. After graduation, his father died, so he decided to go to work to support his family. He worked in several different places in Europe. First in Budapest, Hungary. He wanted to go work for the National Telegraph Company as an engineer, but all he could get at first was a really poorly paying job as a draftsman, which is the guy who draws the blueprints. But eventually they recognized his talent, and when the new telephone exchange opened up in 1881, he was put in charge of it. Later he went to Paris and got a job with the Continental Edison Company. There's his first encounter with Edison. There'll be more later. And at one point, he was sent to Strasbourg, France for a while. Strasbourg's right on the border between France and Germany. That huge wiring problem at one of their railway telegraph stations, and neither country wanted to deal with it, so they just sent Tesla to take care of it. While he was in Budapest working for the telegraph company, he became deathly ill, once again, in some sort of undiagnosed disease where he was hypersensitive to everything, sound and light and touch, which is also a symptom of Asperger's, so that may have been related. But the doctor didn't know what it was and said, I'm not sure what you have, but you're probably going to die. So here's some medicine. But he was still working on this AC problem in his head. And so he says that his desire to live and finish this problem is what pulled him through and got him back to normal again. So one day while he's in Budapest, he's walking in the city park with a friend of his in 1882, and he sees this sunset, and it reminds him of a passage from Faust, which I have translated up here for you. And he's standing there looking at the sunset, and he's reciting this lovely little poem, and all of a sudden, bam, the AC induction motor appears before his eyes. He's solved the problem. He can see it in such detail. He draws it in the sand for his friend. He can see it in such detail that he says, "See my motor? Watch me run it. Now watch me run it backwards." And his friend is going, "Oh yeah, that's cool." Yeah. But he was terribly excited. Let me just give you a brief non-electronics major explanation of this induction motor. Those of you who have taken E&M classes know that you can induce a magnetic current in a coil of wire using a magnetic field. So you put an AC current into this motor. There are pairs of coiled wires, and they create a magnetic field because of the electric current running through them, and the magnetic field rotates smoothly. And there's a rotor in the middle that has another coil of wire, and there's a current induced in that coil that creates another magnetic field. The magnetic fields want to align, and so the smoothly rotating magnetic field drags the rotor around with it. And so that produces a torque, and then you can run all sorts of things off of it. And you'll notice that you don't need the rotor to touch any of these. You don't need any brushes. There's no sparking, there's no wear, and it can run off of AC current. So he solved the problem. The vision came before him in 1882, but he worked on the prototypes and things for the next several years. He didn't submit this patent until 1888. So while he was in Strasbourg working on little toy prototypes of this, someone suggested he go to America and work on the Edison motors. So he packed up all his things, sold a bunch of things, and bought some train tickets. His train tickets and money were stolen from him at the train station, but eventually he made it to America in 1884 with a few belongings, some poems in his pocket, and a couple dollars. But he was hired by this guy, Thomas Edison, very quickly. There's an anecdote that some historians say is not necessarily true, but says that Tesla showed up with a recommendation letter from a previous employer, and the letter was to Thomas Edison, and it said, "I know two great men in this world. You're one of them. The other is this young man before you." And he got the job. So everybody writing recommendation letters, maybe. So here's Tesla again, about 40. He goes to work for Edison, working on his motors. Edison's motors run off of DC current, but that's what all the motors do in those days. And in 1885, he tells Edison, "I can improve your motors and things. I can improve the efficiency of them if you let me work on redesigning them." And Edison goes, "Well, there's $50,000 in it for you if you can do that." So for the next several months, almost a year, Tesla works incredibly hard. He redesigns the motors. He comes back to Edison. He shows him. He says, "Look, the efficiency is improved. They run a lot better. What do you think? Where's my money?" And Edison says, "Oh, Tesla, you don't understand our American humor." And he offers him a $10 raise. So Tesla says, "Nope," and he quits. And he works digging ditches for a while in New York City while he creates his own company, the Tesla Electric Light and Manufacturing Company, in 1886 to make this motor. He finishes the patent he gets the patent for the induction motor in 1888, as I said before. He demonstrates it, and someone in the audience realizes the potential of it, and that someone is George Westinghouse. Now, Westinghouse had a competing electric company, and he wanted to run everything off of AC current. The problem was the whole electric grid for the company had to be one or the other, because it had to be all connected, and you can't really do both at the same time. So they were in huge competition to decide which one was going to win. Westinghouse had a problem though, which is that he had all these things to move and transport AC current, but he didn't have a motor to run off of it. In comes Tesla. Tesla has a great motor. So they sign a contract, he buys all of Tesla's patents, and Tesla gets a $2.50 royalty on every AC motor that's sold. This kicks off what the historians like to call the War of the Currents. So in trying to figure out which current system the US is going to use, Edison and Westinghouse start a big PR war, trying to convince the public on which they should invest in. Edison, I think you might agree, is the bad guy in this situation because he just goes all out. He starts having people publicly electrocute stray dogs and cats with AC current because he's trying to convince everybody that AC current is just too dangerous to have around your children. So they gather up stray cats, unwanted cattle, and electrocute them. He tried to popularize the term being Westinghoused instead of being electrocuted. And he even went to the extent of electrocuting an elephant. This is Topsy the elephant. He was about 20 years old and he killed 3 men in 1903, including his abusive trainer who had tried to feed him live cigarettes. So he killed 3 men. They said, we got to put the elephant down. They usually hang elephants, which seems immensely impractical. And Edison came in and said, nah, let me take care of this for you. And he videotaped the electrocution with AC current. And he spread the video everywhere. You can find it on YouTube today. I decided not to play it for you guys because it's very unpleasant. But despite all of this, Edison's losing the PR war still. Edison was against capital punishment, for humans, I suppose. But he secretly paid a man named Harold Brown to build the first electric chair on AC current, which is very interesting because today they run on DC current. But despite all this, Edison had already lost. Westinghouse and Tesla had been demonstrating their devices at technical exhibitions in Europe and the US. And in 1893, Westinghouse won the contract to build an AC hydroelectric plant at Niagara Falls, which is something Tesla had always wanted to do. He had seen a picture of Niagara Falls when he was 10 years old and told his uncle, someday I'm going to harness that power. And his uncle said, yeah, kid, sure. And then 40 years later, he did it. Here's a picture of their plant. You can see the AC current generators in there. So this is all going on after Tesla had already finished the AC motor. So he's getting some royalties off of it, but he'd finished his part. He had made his motor. He said that actually building and creating the prototypes and the final products weren't nearly as exciting as when he originally conceived of the motor. So he didn't really care anymore. He was on to the next thing. And the next thing was the Tesla coil. In 1890, he says, he performed a laboratory experiment which is one of the most extraordinary and spectacular ever recorded in the annals of science. So he was pretty impressed with himself. And that device was the Tesla coil. There's 2 things you need to know about the Tesla coil at this point. One is that it puts out high voltage discharges into the air. It ionizes the air and lights it up like lightning. It makes lightning bolts or streamers. And his first one that he demonstrated had little 5-inch streamers, but eventually he got them up to 100 feet. And took a lot of great publicity photos like this one. This is a cheat photo, though. It's a double exposure. Tesla's not actually sitting there while the machine is on. They just took the picture twice. But it's still pretty impressive looking. So the other thing that you need to know about a Tesla coil is what he originally designed it for. He didn't design it to make lightning. He designed it to create wireless electricity transfers. So you could hold a vacuum tube, a fluorescent light bulb, next to his coil, and it would light up without being connected. And he had so many ideas for the applications of the system. He wanted to put these Tesla coils all over the world so that they could just transfer electricity. You could have electricity anywhere that you wanted. You wouldn't have to plug anything into the wall. It would just work everywhere. He had lots of other exciting ideas. He noticed one day when a thunderstorm started that the lightning flashed and then it started to rain. So he thought, well, if lightning causes rain, and I have this machine that makes lightning, I could just go into the desert and bring rains to the desert. He thought he could do amazing things with this machine. He was working on it in New York City, first in a lab on South Fifth Avenue. In 1891, he became an American citizen when he was 35. And in 1895, while he was working on the Tesla coil and many other projects, his lab burned down. He lost all of his notes and equipment in a terrible fire, which was a little bit suspicious because the next year someone in Europe patented exactly one of the devices that he had been working on, exactly the same thing. So it's one of the first of many conspiracy theory things that you can see in Tesla's life that looks a little sketchy. But he recovered. He moved to a lab in Houston, on Houston Street. Here's a picture of it. You can see the big coils of wire, kind of like my little baby one over here, that he used for his Tesla coil. So he keeps working on all sorts of things: X-ray photography, radio transmission, electrotherapy for insomnia. He wondered if maybe he could harvest energy that's present throughout space. He wanted to bring energy and communications to everyone on the planet. The War of the Currents left Edison and Westinghouse nearly bankrupt. And Tesla's a good guy, so he went to Westinghouse and said, I'm just going to rip up this contract, you can have my patents, and you don't have to pay me anymore. Which sounds very idealistic, and it was, because then he was broke. But he kept working. He, in 1897, at age 41, he filed the first radio patent. And in 1898, he demonstrated this fantastic little device, which is a radio-controlled boat, the first radio-controlled device. He demonstrated it for the US military, thinking, as many scientists do at one point or another, that this would end wars. Because once you could send your little robots into battle, then you wouldn't need war anymore, because you wouldn't need to send men to fight. He soon realized that that wouldn't fix the problem. This was just before World War I. And later in his life, he said that really what you need to do to prevent war is to get rid of the causes of war. And so that's why he focused on free energy and communications and to trying to bring everyone closer together. But he demonstrated this fantastic boat. He wanted to develop the field of what he called teleautomatics, but what we call robotics. But despite this very impressive demonstration, which there's a nice illustration of, radio control remained mostly a novelty until World War I, and then everyone started using it. Now, I mentioned that he had submitted the first radio patent, and some of you who know a little bit about history may say, wait a minute, Marconi invented the radio. And indeed, Marconi received the Nobel Prize for radio in 1909, and Tesla unsuccessfully sued him, and never quite got the credit for it. But it's on the record that he did file the first patent. There are rumors that Edison and Tesla were supposed to receive the Nobel Prize in 1915, but supposedly neither of them would accept it with the other one because they hated each other so much. So neither of them ever got a Nobel Prize, despite how many advances they made. So Tesla decides he needs more room for his Tesla coil research, some sort of outdoor facility, I suppose, so he doesn't electrocute all of New York City. And he goes to Colorado Springs in Colorado. Produced 100-foot discharges from his Tesla coil in 1900. He says when he first got these powerful discharges, he was reminded of the first tiny spark that he created with his first Tesla coil, and he was thrilled by sensations akin to those he felt when he discovered the rotating magnetic field and developed the AC induction motor. So he's got that old fire back. He proved that the Earth could conduct electricity, and he started to look into how he could use the Earth as a conductor or harvest energy from the atmosphere. He really was focused on this global system of energy transport. His next step was to design the Warden Tower on Long Island, which was an early wireless telecommunications tower for commercial transatlantic transmissions and broadcasting. He started working on it in 1902, but eventually World War I broke out, and he had already torn up his contracts with Westinghouse. When World War I broke out, he lost all of his European funding because they were a little busy, and eventually he ran out of money. He had to stop construction on the tower. You can see it partially built here, he's building the dome on top, and he had to fire everyone and just leave it sit. And eventually he sold the deed to pay off the debt, and it was torn down by the U.S. government in 1917 because they thought it might be used by spies, German spies, for transmissions, or it might be some sort of landmark for German submarines. So they tore it down. So in the later years of his life, he's still working. He receives the AIEE, the engineering group's highest honor, the Edison Medal, ironically, in 1916. Here's a picture of it. I'm sure he treasured it. His obsessive-compulsive disorder symptoms became much worse. Here he is at age 76, looking less cheerful. Particularly the repetitions he had to do, in threes, his obsession with pigeons and things like that. He got very quirky, and rumors started to spread that he was going insane. He really personified the mad scientist trope for a lot of people. He was staying at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. Here's an image of it. This is when it was located at its old location in New York City, which is now the Empire State Building. But he was staying there. He sold the deed to Warden to the owner of the Waldorf Astoria to pay off the debt for the hotel. But he continued working. He worked on radar. He was a pioneer of radar work, vertical takeoff and landing aircraft. Because he'd always wanted to build flying machines, he used to jump off of barns as a kid trying to fly. And of course, by then the airplane had been invented, but he was still working on it. So he designed a vertical takeoff and landing plane. And he also worked on what he called a peace ray, but the newspapers loved to call it the death ray, which was some sort of electronic ray gun that you see in science fiction. That never really saw the light of day, although the military was very interested in it, but unfortunately he died before, well, maybe fortunately, he died before that was developed and used by the military. Or maybe it was never actually feasible. It's hard to know because a lot of the notes were lost. He obtained nearly 300 patents in his life, which is ridiculous. And he spent the last 10 years of his life in a room at the Hotel New Yorker. He died alone in his room on January 7th, 1943, at age 86 of heart thrombus. Supposedly this pigeon had been visiting him every day for the last few months, and he saw it as a sign that his life was nearly over, and he was correct. His papers and notes were impounded by the U.S. government. The Alien Office, despite the fact that he was a U.S. citizen and had been for years, and they were declared top secret. And the U.S. government had scientists pour through it to try to find anything useful about this death ray stuff, all sorts of other weaponry he might have been working on, anything that could be useful. A lot of the notes were lost, but Tesla's family eventually won possession of them, and a lot of the stuff is now housed in the Nikola Tesla Museum in Belgrade, Serbia. Tesla, despite not being as well known as Edison, has a lot of honors and awards and recognitions after his death. Serbia and Croatia both claim him as their own, and he has a huge museum in both countries. As most of you probably know, the magnetic field unit, the Tesla, is named after him. That's where most people have heard of him. Elon Musk started the electric car company recently named Tesla Motors that uses an AC induction motor, much more modern version. There's a crater on the moon named after him. There's an asteroid named after him. Several things in Serbia and Croatia, the largest power point in Serbia, the Belgrade Nikola Tesla Airport. The Serbian 100 dinar note has a picture of him on it. It's my favorite picture, actually, of him. And here's a lot of stamps that have Tesla on them, most of them from Yugoslavia, Serbia, some from the Czech Republic. And that's it for the talk session of this presentation. Does anyone have any questions before I do my demo?
Did he receive any American honors? Or was he always considered foreign?
We definitely claim him as our own because everyone wants a piece of this. And he was an American citizen, and he loved America. He loved his homeland too. There's letters that they had that say he still considered himself a Serbian, but he also just loved America. When he first came to the U.S., he said he thought it was 100 years backwards from Europe, but 5 years later when he went back to Europe, he realized that America was really 100 years ahead of Europe. And so he received some academic type awards like the Edison Medal and things like that. But really, he's really fallen into the shadow of Edison. I think that Edison is a story that's told to children a lot more than Tesla is. You know, which is funny because they had completely different ways of inventing. Edison was not very educated and just took the grimy hands engineer approach of just trying things over and over again. Then there's the story of him developing the light bulb filament, and he just tried every material he could think of until he found one that worked. Whereas Tesla was highly educated and really understood the mathematics of electromagnetic systems and things like that. And so that's why they butted heads a lot. And so perhaps because Edison was born here, and perhaps just because Edison fit more into the American dream of just try really hard and it'll work, we hear more about Edison than about Tesla. So that's a long way of saying not really. Yeah.
Was there ever any major accounts of like major electrocutions or anything?
Were there any major electrocutions from?
I mean, when I teach 111 lab, I shock myself.
So there's this. Tesla discovered what he thought was an interesting property of AC electricity, which is what he called the skin effect, which is that he could touch it and it wouldn't, very high voltages wouldn't hurt him, because he thought the electricity was running through the surface of his skin and not going to his heart and harming him. However, if you get high enough voltages, you'll electrocute yourself. That's a false, in fact, it's a kind of an urban legend myth that people still hold today and isn't quite true medically. But I don't know much about the medical effects of it. He would let electricity run through himself and hold light bulbs and things and power them. He loved doing demos and things like that. But he was never seriously harmed. He was very healthy until he died. He lived a long time. And as far as I know, he didn't kill anybody. Unlike Stress. He didn't Westinghouse anybody. Yeah.
So you said when he was in Europe and stuff, he got all these crazy diseases.
Yeah.
But whenever he came to America, did he get the same kind
Yeah,
of
he
things?
said in his autobiography, he says, he keeps going on about how healthy and hale he is. He wrote his autobiography in 1919 when he was in the U.S. And he said he attributed it to the fact that he didn't drink any caffeine, he didn't smoke, he stayed very healthy and things like that. And yet he would tell all these stories about how as a child he'd get deathly ill. I personally think some of those stories are exaggerated. He seems a bit of a hypochondriac if you read his autobiography, and I think that ties into a lot of some of his other mental problems. But for the later half of his life, he was very proud that he was healthy, and yeah, he didn't get terribly ill very often.
Like, it sounded like he was very critical of himself throughout his life. So I'm wondering, like, towards the end of his life, did he look back and was very proud of the things he had done? Or was he more of, he wished he could have done more?
I can tell you what his autobiography said, which was about 20 years before he died. And he doesn't seem to be too critical, but he doesn't seem to be too proud of himself either. He seems to have just enjoyed the process of inventing. And he had certainly accomplished things that he was proud of. I quoted what he said when he invented the Tesla coil, that he thought it was just fantastic and extraordinary. But he mostly just enjoyed it so much that he would get excited about the science itself and the physics, than saying, wow, check out how smart I am. So he was definitely not in it for the glamour.
Just a comment. The generators in Niagara Falls are still operating, and they're running at 25 hertz. I've been in that room, and they convert from 25 to 60 hertz because Canada was totally on 25 hertz until about 1919. But the generators are still being used.
Yeah. Marcus?
I checked on the internet, and there is a huge cult about Tesla as a mythical figure with inventions that were top secret. And
Because
what's
yeah,
the story?
well,
behind it?
because well, for one thing, anytime a scientist's notes get impounded by the U.S. government, you start getting a little suspicious. And because near the end of his life, the papers went nuts over this death ray thing. There's a lot of conspiracy theories out there about what he could have made. There's a lot of anecdotal evidence of demonstrations he gave that he didn't really take notes on what he had done, but they would say, he could juggle lightning in his hands and things like that. And so people still say, we don't even know how these things work, and we lost all the notes. In researching how the Tesla coil worked, which is much more complex than the induction motor, and I don't quite understand it, I finally found a really good explanation with a diagram that was right at my level, got to the bottom of the webpage, and it was oldmage.com, and started listing all the magical uses of the Tesla coil. So people really grab on to his science and devices just because they're so fantastic and amazing, visually even, compared to what had come before.
Did he write his autobiography before they built down the tower that he was building for? Or that was after?
It was. He talked about Warden, so I think he wrote it after
What
Warden.
did he share in that?
He actually, the autobiography was good and bad, and it was good because he had a lot of anecdotes. It was bad because he tended to skim over the upsetting things in his life. So I couldn't find a lot about Edison. He didn't use his autobiography to badmouth Edison at all. He didn't talk about Wardenclyffe at all. He mostly focused on his childhood and the process of inventing things. So I don't know how he felt about it, really.
Is it true that by the end of his life he became a bit of a mysticist?
Yeah, it's generally agreed that this is a technical term. He pretty much lost it near the end of his life. And that's why there are a lot of conspiracy theories about his inventions near the end. Because some of them were really good, he worked on radar and things like that, and some of them were so out there that nobody even talks about them anymore. He started believing a lot of things that weren't physically sound, perhaps. Yeah. But that may have been related to his mental problems, it may have just been, that's what he got into. It's hard to tell.
I seem to remember a TV documentary on the New York hotel that a cult of people actually want to get in that room, that they're renting Tesla's room out. They won't tell you which room number it is, but I was trying to look it up and see what. Did you come across it?
I know people have done seances and things. He really he appeals to both the physicists and engineers, and hey, look at this cool advances in electromagnetism, and also you can create lightning to communicate psychokinetically with other people. And because he started believing in ghosts and things near the end of his life.
We should have gotten bored after.
Any other questions? You guys want to see the Tesla coil? Okay. I assure you this is perfectly safe. I've done this several times. So the idea of the Tesla coil, thanks. No, actually the lights off are better. So the idea of the Tesla coil, if you can see, there's a primary coil of wire and a secondary coil. They have a different number of turns, and if you remember from E&M class, or I'll just tell you, that can increase the voltage. And that's what a transformer is. There's a transformer here that transforms the voltage from the wall. There's a bunch of stuff in here that I soldered together but don't quite understand, so I'll skip it. And this is the real Tesla coil part of it. It's just a high voltage transformer. It puts out a really high voltage, low current, and that's what discharges. You see tiny little discharges, and it'll look purple because this coil is just going to vibrate from this end. And then I'll show you the really cool part, which is the wireless energy, because I have some light bulbs here. I'm going to move them so they don't light up right away. A lot of people ask me, I was hoping you guys would ask, but you let me down. A lot of people ask why, if this wireless energy transmission stuff works so well, why don't we use it today? Why do we use wires and things? There's a couple of speculations. One is that, the cynical one, is that you can't put a meter on wireless electricity. So nobody wanted to invest in this because how are they going to make any money? And the other more practical thing is if you're surrounded by an electric field all the time that will light up light bulbs that aren't even plugged in, how do you turn off the lights? The light bulbs in your closet will be on all the time. And so those are two reasons why it may not have ever.
My pacemaker might have a problem.
Yeah, I was going to make a joke about anyone who's got a pacemaker, you might want to step outside, everybody be cautious, but it's not dangerous. All right, ready? So at the end here you can see the force is vibrating the copper wire at the end, and it's making really interesting looking sparks. If I move this antenna around, it'll increase and decrease the length of those discharges. You guys at the end can come up and look at this more closely. But here's the cool part. These are just some fluorescent tubes that I bought from the hardware store. Right? Like a lightsaber. Some people, you can look online for Tesla coils. People built really, really cool systems. The sound that this discharge is making, you can control, and people will set up Tesla coils that can play different songs, including Star Wars. But they can. It's really bright. You can do all sorts of fun things with these. Now, thanks to Dr. Pittman, when he saw this demo the other day, he said, I have a bunch of different light bulb tubes in my closet. In his optics lab, not his closet at home. And these are like neon tubes. They're filled with different gases. And because the fluorescent tube is designed to light up white, but these will light up different colors depending on what kind of gas it is. They're not as bright. There we go. They're not as bright as the others, but you can see different colors. And in fact, Todd and I were really pleased to see that when he pulled out some of the boxes of these tubes, one of them was labeled Mulligan from when Dr. Mulligan taught that class. So that is the end of my demonstration. I'm going to leave this on, and you guys can continue to ask questions and come up and play with this yourself because it's really cool looking. Just don't touch the lightning.
What frequency does this run at?
It's an excellent question. I actually looked up, people have been asking me that, and the voltage. I looked up the manual that it came with, the kit came with, because I built this off a kit, and it doesn't say. And I'm not an electronics expert, but I hadn't checked on the frequency. I can look it up. I think it just runs off the wall frequency, which is, I'm not sure.
I can.
You probably can
A
figure it out.
long time ago, when I was young, I mean a long time ago, I built a Tesla coil for Popular Science magazine, oatmeal can, much like you had, but use a vacuum tube to drive it. And I
For
lit
the
fluorescent
spark gap?
bulbs. Yeah.
Okay.
So it was running at somewhat higher frequency, like 100 kilohertz.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, I'll have to look it up in a minute. I brought the manual with me on my computer, so if people had real questions like that, I can.
I speculate that you got a transistor in there, right?
There's a transformer here.
Transfer, yeah.
Yeah, that steps off the wall. I think it would be labeled.
A transistor running as an oscillator.
Yes, rather than the spark gap. I only understand about half the components that I soldered
That's
into
okay.
this thing. Is the
I
problem.
don't understand
There's a
it
timer
either.
that controls yeah, there's some capacitors.
Well, I think Tesla was running it at a very high frequency, which is why he didn't get electrocuted when that
Right.
was
I think that's right.
Okay. In building this and doing my final research for the presentation, I really wished I had taken an electronics course at some point or another. Because I could say, oh, well, there's a capacitor. I know what a capacitor does. What's this other thing? But
Typical math major.
yeah, typical math major. But I'll show you guys. I brought it came with a circuit diagram, so anyone who's interested in things that I can't answer can take a look and you can figure it out without my help. Any other questions?